and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday, the 4th of February 2021. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin, and I am your host, Finbar Markey. Thanks for joining us this evening, folks. We're going to have a look at news from around the world today that you won't see on RTE, and we're also going to be talking about life in Cuba. Is it really a tyrannical dictatorship? Or could we learn from the people of Cuba and from the Cuban system itself? Before we speak to our guests, let's have a look at the news over the last week. Could I just ask our guests, if they're in the background, if they could actually mute their microphone, because I'm hearing a lot of background interference. Thank you. We'll look at Irish news first. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one story in the Irish news this week that reflects the relationship between the government classes and the governed themselves, the people of Ireland. And that's the story of the High Court case of Lindsay Bennett, who has taken the state and laboratories involved in the cervical cancer check scandal to the High Court to try to secure some kind of financial future for her children when she is gone. Lindsay is one of the many women that were wrongly diagnosed in the cervical cancer smear scandal. Lindsay sued the state and laboratories involved in the testing, and the state and laboratories settled the case with Lindsay yesterday in the High Court. The state and laboratories continue to accept no liability in these matters and have settled out of court. We have video footage of Lindsay speaking from the steps of the High Court yesterday. Could you roll that footage first, please, Stephen?
I can now focus on my own fight to stay alive as long as I can. To my daughters, Zoe and Hayley, I hope I have done enough to secure you both a future free from financial worries. And that even with me not here to guide you, that you can both pursue your dreams. And remember, Mammy loves you.
I have no doubt that as Lindsay Bennett was speaking those words, government PR spin doctors were spinning the words into their favour before she had even finished saying what she had to say. Turning to European news, this week the Italian president has asked the former head of the ECB, Mario Draghi, to form a technocratic government in Italy. This comes as a result of a minority party pulling out of the coalition government there and essentially collapsing the government. The president has ruled out any new elections and has called for a government with no politics, and that's a quotation. This is the second time in 10 years that a technocratic, unelected government has been foisted on the people of Italy. Draghi, formerly of Goldman Sachs, the World Bank and the ECB, is a cheerleader for bailouts for banks and austerity for society. The biggest party in Italy and the biggest coalition partner, the Five Star Movement, have said that they reject calls for a government of no politics. And so the question will remain to be seen over the next few weeks in Italy. Will the politics of fear win, and will a technocratic government be put into place there? A bigger question arises from this as well. As we enter into a post-pandemic EU, will technocratic governments become the government model of the future? We'll keep an eye on that one. Staying with news in the EU, the UK Institute for Statecraft, yes, you heard me right, Institute for Statecraft, is not something from a Harry Potter movie. The UK Institute of Statecraft was invited to present at the EU Committee on Foreign Interference this week. The British Institute for Statecraft is a state-funded counterintelligence and propaganda operations organisation. It not only performs propaganda and counterintelligence operations outside of Britain, but also within Britain itself. The absolute irony and the hypocrisy of the Institute for Statecraft presenting at an EU Committee on Foreign Interference was not lost on MEP Claire Daly this week. Can you roll that clip of Claire speaking about this hypocrisy?
President, and I've no doubt that Russia is engaged in propaganda to promote its interests, because if they're not, they'd be the only ones who aren't doing it. But what I'm more worried about is the fact that we have given the floor today to an organisation funded by the UK government, the Institute for Statecraft, basically by a foreign government, in other words, staffed by former UK military and intelligence officers to promote anti-Russian narratives. Now, could we not have come up with somebody a bit better than that to provide independent testimony to this committee? We've been told that the Kremlin nurtures political actors, a tactic actually which the Institute of Statecraft itself has used in documents which appeared on the internet, which they haven't disputed. They have used their network to run a whisper campaign against, for example, Jeremy Corbyn, accusing him of being a stooge of the Kremlin. They have interfered in the EU member state Spain, sabotaging the PSOE government's appointment as head of national security because he wasn't anti-Russian enough. We've heard slanders of the Catalan independence movement as well, almost claiming that they're somehow puppets of the Kremlin as well. This is ridiculous, lads. Could we not come up with somebody independent to do this? Well, my question is really to the committee chair, if I can finish the point. Do you think it would be appropriate to invite someone from a Russian hybrid warfare outfit to give objective analysis about UK foreign interference? So why is this okay? It's not okay, and it discredits the committee, to be honest.
Turning to news in the United States, and shiny new President Joe Biden is breaking the record for presidents breaking promises. In the name of national unity, he has declared that he's not going to keep any of the promises he made in case it upsets Republicans. Biden and the Democrats control both houses of government in the United States and the presidency itself, and they can make real all of their promises. But instead, they've not only ditched Medicare for all, but even the public health care option itself. He has also ditched the Green New Deal. And now, after berating President Trump in relation to $2,000 checks, he himself has failed to deliver those checks to the people of the United States. Now Biden and his crew have dropped the figure for those checks to $1,400, and they're not going to get the checks until at least March. Here's a tweet from an angry Mike Unleashed that was on Twitter yesterday. The deal was $2,000 checks immediately, not $1,400 checks in 2 months. Democrats can pass it today. People are starving. The Democrat excuses are their own. This is aberrant to make people wait another day, let alone 6 more weeks. But I can maybe understand why Joe Biden is taking so long to meet the needs of normal and average American families. He's very, very busy at the moment bringing his old war hawk friends back together for another bloody frenzy. Biden's pick of a new Secretary for State is Antony Blinken. Blinken was central to US foreign policy in the Obama administration and was Hillary Clinton's sidekick as they liberated Libya, leaving the country in tatters with war and suffering on a scale that the Libyan people have never seen before. Blinken was also central staff during the attempted toppling of the Bashir government in Syria that involved the US arming Islamic extremists and essentially destroying the fabric of that nation. The US under Biden and Blinken have rededicated themselves to the destruction of Syria this week, with US forces re-entering over the eastern borders. Blinken's future intentions may be gauged by his comments on US responsibility for the destruction in Syria. We have a clip here of Antony Blinken when he was asked what caused and what has been the main contributor and who is responsible for the destruction of Syria over the last 10 years. And this is what Blinken's answer is. Can you roll, Stephen?
Anyone who had any responsibility for our policy, myself included, with regard to Syria, has to accept the reality that we did not succeed, and that on our watch many people suffered, and that's something that we'll have to contend with for those of us who are involved for the rest of our lives. I think there's plenty of blame to go around, starting with the Syrians themselves, starting with Iran and Russia and the other patrons of the regime, starting with all of the Arab states and other neighboring states. But we have a responsibility too as a country that more than any other in the world has some ability to mobilize the international community to deal with these problems.
Okay, so according to Anthony Blinken, the United States and Israel have no responsibility with regards to what's happening in Syria. And in fact, the only people that have responsibility are those that went in to defend the Syrian people after the United States and Israel made every effort to destabilize that country. But luckily, with the will of the Syrian people and the Syrian government have it now that they are back in control of most of that country with the assistance of Russia and other allies. Can I just ask, if you're enjoying what you're hearing here, if you think that you're hearing news that you won't hear on RTE, but that needs to get out there, share it out on Facebook, on Twitter, that you're watching now. Give it a share, give this program a like, and let's help to build together a new media platform, because that's how it's done. We at the Irish Inquiry and DoubleDown, we don't have the money to put into major advertising. And so the only way that we can spread this kind of news and get people seeing other sides of stories is by you sharing it right now, this minute. And so you are contributing to building this new medium as well. So please, if you're enjoying the show, please share it out there. We're going to turn to our guests now, and we're going to talk about Cuba. There's been two sides to Cuba in terms of the narrative that we in Ireland have grown up with. On the one hand, we've grown up with the romance of the Cuban Revolution, of Che Guevara, of Fidel Castro. But on the other hand, we've been inundated with propaganda from the United States and from European countries for 60 years, telling us that the Cuban government is in itself a dictatorship and a tyranny, and that the people of Cuba are oppressed. Tonight, we're joined by members of an organisation called Cuba Support Group Ireland. And they are Bill O'Brien, Hilary Casey, and Nina Blodau. I hope I got that name right. Nina Blodau. And they spend a significant amount of time in Cuba. And in fact, Nina and Hilary are married to Cubans and would spend a number of months a year in Cuba. So hopefully we're going to get a genuine, authentic insight into what's happening to Cuba and what life is like in Cuba. First of all, Bill, Hilary, Nina, are you there and can you hear me? Take off your mute. If you have your mute on, take it off there, folks.
Hi, Finbar.
Hi, guys. And can we hear you, Bill?
I think you can you?
Oh, yeah, that's lovely. Lovely soft tones from you, Bill. Guys, before we even start, Bill, can you explain to our viewers what the Cuban Support Group Ireland is? Maybe in a few sentences to start off.
Yes. Cuba Support Group Ireland has been around since 1993, which is 28 years ago. It was after the fall of the Soviet Union. Cuba needed extra friends, and a lot of us were very familiar with the Cuban situation. So Cuba Support Group Ireland was formed. And in those 28 years, we have made a great contribution in explaining Cuba to lots of people in Ireland. We've made films, we've sent work parties there, we've sent youth groups there, and we've brought around the Cuban ambassadors. I've worked under 5, I think, at this stage. We launched books, we had book launches. So we have really I suppose we have a limited audience, but like yourself, but we do have a very dedicated audience. And when we do hold meetings, and we've held them in every major city in Ireland, we tend to get a very qualitative and responsive audience, people that want to know about what's going on.
So you're an advocacy group, I suppose, and as well as an information group, telling people about Cuba.
We're actually a friendship group. We're a friendship group, and we have people in all political parties in Ireland. We have a Dáil group in the Dáil under Thomas Pringle, and we have lots of even Micheál Martin when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ireland. And he was also the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Europe when he actually broke the blockade and was the first Foreign Minister to go to Cuba. And we had the presidency of the EU at the time. And Micheál Martin actually went there and broke the blockade. He was the first for the minister to do so.
Well,
and
that
we've always
sounds,
very
sounds
grateful
I
for
wouldn't,
that.
hold on, Bill. I wouldn't usually compliment Micheál Martin, but maybe on that one and singular point, he is to be complimented. Nina, can I ask you how you got involved in the Cuba Support Group Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. So, firstly, I got involved through my father, actually. He was involved in, before this group, there was a friendship society. And my dad is an artist and used to take his students from Limerick School of Art and Design to Moscow and to Paris and to Leningrad at the time, just to travel and see more. He felt the students needed that. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he decided that we'd go, the flights were, it was Cubana at the time, and that we would one day not go towards, he wouldn't go to Moscow, but he'd go to Havana. So we got on in Shannon, and my family and I went to Shannon, so I was a 10-year-old. That was the first time. And then through my teenage years, my father did a lot of cultural exchanges with Cuba, in Cuban work. So we were always having faxes coming through from different print workshops, which he discovered in Havana. And then later on, I went back as a 20-year-old and to learn Spanish and met my husband.
So you're married to Cuban, is that right?
Yeah. Well, yes. A few years later, I ended up marrying a Cuban, and we have 3 children, and we go back every year. So for it can be months on end that we go back, but we're very much integrated into that family. Okay. So.
I'm going to just turn to Hilary for a wee minute there. Hilary, how did you get involved in the Cuban Support Group? Are you married to a Cuban too?
No, I'm not, I'm afraid, but I do have a surrogate family. It sounds very strange. I actually went on my own to Cuba 12 years ago because honestly, it's the safest place in the world for a female traveller, and I speak Spanish. So I just ended up staying in Nina's family's house, Kenny's grandmother, who owns like a B&B there, and I just ended up being friends with their family, and they adopted me. So I go back to them every year. It's brilliant, and that's how I met Nina. So I suppose I did my little thing. I supported them in my little way until I knew, until COVID set in, and then Nina and I started to speak. So I became involved because at least this way I can still help. We can still support them, and that's my reason for being here.
Okay. And these days, and historically over the last 50 or 60 years, regularly traveling to Cuba has been seen by some, such as people in the United States, the government of the United States, as a political statement, even just traveling there. And in that context, have any of you guys felt that you've come under any extra scrutiny as a result of your travels over and back to Cuba? Maybe I'll open that up to Nina first.
So, well, traveling to Cuba is totally normal. There's no problem. It's safe. It's ideal place to travel with children. The Americans are falsely told a whole host of other things and are not allowed. But for us Europeans, it's normal. It's as normal as going to Spain. So I might pass it over to Hilary. She might have a more input on that.
Hilary, have you had any problems traveling to Cuba? Do you feel that maybe there's been more scrutiny on you than other travelers?
Absolutely not, no. All you need is a tourist card, which costs nothing. It costs about €20 in the embassy. That's all you need. Once you get there, it's so easy to get around. People are so helpful. It's it's full of just backpackers, female tourists, because it's so safe. Nothing will happen to you.
But what I'm trying to establish is, because you're over and back to Cuba, it's noted. It's probably quite noted on computer systems from customs around the world, and that information goes to secret services possibly. I'm just trying to wonder, have you ever had any issues like that? Because I'm going to play a clip from Secretary Mike Pompeo, or ex-Secretary Mike Pompeo, a statement he made last year, I think, in relation to Cuba. And he paints a pretty grim picture. And he also infers that people who are supportive of the Cuban government may require extra monitoring and different techniques to be managed. Could you roll that clip first there, please, Stephen?
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
Okay, I don't think that's the clip I was looking for. Is there another clip there with Pompeo in it? No, that's okay, Stephen. Okay. Okay. Well, that in itself. So the clip that I was hoping to play, that was my error, was of Mike Pompeo talking about Cuba, describing it as a tyrannical government, describing it as a terrorist government, and essentially labeling it in a similar fashion that they would label North Korea and other states as well. Maybe I could ask Bill first. Do you have any reply, Bill, to the accusations by people like Mike Pompeo that Cuba is a tyranny and that the people of Cuba are oppressed and need freedom and to be liberated by the United States?
Well, I have visited Cuba on two occasions, one in 2003 and one in 2019. And I spent about 4 weeks the first time and 3 weeks the second time. And I've never met more educated, friendly and decent people. They can talk to you about anything and everything that goes on in the world. They know everything that goes on in America. They even know about Ireland, which an awful lot of people in Europe don't know. And it certainly isn't in any way oppressive. You can go anywhere you like, and you don't see policemen or plainclothes people following you or anything like that. All nonsense. You can do pretty much what you like once you do it with the law. If you behave yourself in the same way as you behave yourself in Ireland, you're not going to get any trouble. So I don't know what he's on about.
You know, some might say...
Sorry?
You know, as an example, some might say that people who visit North Korea are in a little bubble over there and they don't get to see the real North Korea. Were you in a little bubble when you visited Cuba, or did you get to see the real Cuba?
I was certainly in no little bubble. I made friends with very nice Cuban people that brought me anywhere I wanted to go. I got on any bus I wanted to go on to and went to. The second time I was more of a tourist than the first time. The first time I was in a work brigade and I was walking along in the fields and on building sites with fellow Cubans. But the second time I decided, because I was retired, I'd just go and have a look at the country. And I didn't even plan it. When I got there, I decided to go to this place and that place and the other place, and I went. And I had no problems. And I met an awful lot of foreigners there, and especially Canadians. There's lots of Canadians there, and they have no problem being there. And I also met a lot of Germans, and they had no problem being there. And some of the holiday resorts were nearly all exclusive for foreigners, for the hard currency. But that doesn't mean that the Cubans couldn't go. They were still. I went there with my Cuban friends. There was no restrictions at all in anywhere. No one restricted me. I didn't have to fill in forms to say that I'm leaving this town and going to the next town. I just got on the bus and went.
Okay. Could I turn to Hilary and Nina on that same question? Maybe Nina first, if you don't mind. Mike Pompeo says that Cuba is a tyrannical dictatorship. The people are oppressed. It's a terrorist country. The government needs to be changed in any way necessary. What do you have to say to that? You live there a lot of the time, as does Hilary.
Well, firstly, I would just like to say that who believes Mike Pompeo? He threw America out of the World Health Organization, took them out of the Paris Agreement, took them out of the Iran nuclear deal. So his opinion has, he couldn't wipe the boots of Cuba. They have so much to offer that he couldn't shine a torch to that. So really, his opinion doesn't matter. But talking about Cuba, when you go there, you meet an open, proud, flamboyant people that are willing to share opinions. And sometimes when you don't ask for them, in fact, so don't go there if you don't like talking and chatting. That's just when you meet people and you live with people. That's how it is. As for the terrorist, the only terrorists in this conversation is the US. They have have attacked Cuba and many Cubans have lost their lives through bombs, through plane attacks, and I actually could be here for an hour just listing off the different attacks. And there's been a recent film out by an Irish producer called Castro's Spies, and I would advise anyone to watch that if they want to know more in detail about what I'm speaking about, but also the fact that the hypocrisy of the Americans, because they are the ones with the war against Cuba, and I mean that by the blockade, and we can get into that as we go through the interview. Yeah. I'll pause there and
I'll turn to Hilary just for a wee minute. Hilary, when you regularly visit Cuba, do you feel that you're going into a dystopian Orwellian nightmare?
No, absolutely not. It is a struggle for them, obviously. Like, I mean, they just don't have stuff. You see people queuing for things like soap. It's just heartbreaking. But like, they get by. The Cubans are so positive. Like, what they don't have, they invent. It's like there's no such thing as no for them. They are highly educated people. So when I go there, it's like it's a happy time. I can do whatever I want, like Bill said. Like, I mean, there's no restrictions. Once you get there, it's just it's fantastic.
Okay, let's get into what life is like in Cuba, just to see if there really is a tyranny there. Is there a democratic system in Cuba? So Cuba is a one-party system. Is there any form of democracy? Are there votes or elections? How does it work? Maybe we'll open up with Nina there, and then we'll move on to Bill, if you don't mind. Nina.
Yeah, there's some kind of a mythology out there that Cuba are undemocratic. The US again paints this downtrodden people who are scared, afraid to gather. And the opposite reality. So the democratic system in Cuba is a participatory democracy, and the people are encouraged to actively participate in the running of the country. So Cuba facilitates discussion, dialogue, and debate. Many people believe there's no voting system, for example. So however, for a country that has no voting system, the electoral system takes 7 months, and it's extremely, it's very systematic. So, and if I could just break that down, so we could kind of understand that at our level when we're going to vote. So, what happens? When you're going to vote as a Cuban, or even when you want to vote someone to represent you within the area or within your town, the locals or the neighbors gather. They will vote on, we'll just say Jose, and one neighbor says Jose he's great. He's been able to solve some problems for us. Jose would like to be a delegate. like, can I just make clear that anyone, you don't have to be a part of the party, you don't need to be a certain religion, anyone can get involved in the political system. It's very much grassroots. This is the point. So anyway, you vote on your local representative, and those local representatives go on to vote at a county level. And at county level, they go on to vote at a national level, and the national votes for the president. So, and not only so, and all the time we go back to the local delegates. So halfway through a term, those delegates can also be voted down. So if they have made promises that they haven't communicated or that they haven't achieved, those delegates can be voted down. So to quote my father-in-law, he would say it's the most democratic system.
Okay, so you have the power of recall. It's not a system where you just go and vote every 4 to 5 years and then all the promises are broken. Those promises have to be maintained. I'm going to turn to Bill. Can I just ask the guest, just to ensure that our volume quality improves a little bit, when I'm speaking to you, could you just keep your finger over the mute button, and if I'm not speaking to you, just go on mute, just because I can hear a lot of feedback coming in. Bill, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
How are you, Bill? Bill, what's your experience of the democratic system in Cuba?
Well, the democratic system in Cuba is a participation system. As Nina said, we have a representative system, which means that we vote for people to represent us, and we get them every 4 years if we're lucky, and they don't have to be recalled in the meantime. They can do what they like, and there's no way we can get rid of them. Where the participation means that if every 2 years they would be assessed, and if they weren't up to scratch, then they would someone else would be picked for to represent them. It's not so much as a one-party system; it's a non-party system, and that's the way they do it. It's a dictatorship of the people. It's not a dictatorship of any dictator. It's the people. The system is written in such a way that the people have the maximum say, and it continues to have the maximum say on a continual basis. So therefore, as Nina's father-in-law says, it's a much more superior democratic system than what we have here in this country. Like what we have in this country is appalling. Like you have nepotism and you have cronyism and you have all sorts. And then the opposition here, the so-called opposition, even if they agree with what the governments have to do is doing, they have to knock it down because otherwise they wouldn't be the opposition. And it's a lot of nonsense.
Is there an opposition in Cuba? If I oppose the actual system itself in Cuba, not just oppose particular policies, but the system itself in Cuba, would there be a place for me to say that freely?
You could go to your local meeting and you could say, yeah, for me, I want the whole system abolished and I want to have the Western system brought in. But the chances of you getting people to support that is nil, because the people just wouldn't do it. But if there was something happening in your area that you didn't like, and you went along and made logical arguments against it, and you could sway people over to your position and listen to what you had to say, and you might even have to amend what you had to say yourself when you listen to other people's views, and they might have to amend their views when they listen to yours. And that's the kind of opposition, and that's the kind of democracy they have in Cuba, which I call true democracy.
Okay. Can I turn to Hilary for? Can I just turn to Hilary for a wee minute there? Hilary,
I think the guys have.
Just say, yes? No, go on ahead, Hilary.
No, I said I think the guys have pretty much covered that.
Yeah, I've got a good question for you.
Perfect.
Arriving in Cuba from Ireland, you know, there can be a lot of keeping up with the Joneses in Ireland and a bit of snobbery and poshness and things like that. Is there a class system for someone who regularly visits Cuba? Have you noticed? Is there a class system in Cuba? Like we'd have an upper class, a middle class, and a lower or a working class.
There is a class system, but the class are children and old people. in Cuba, the most important people are their children and their old people. They're so well taken care of. It's like a child is like a god. Like every child and every old person get a ration every day of milk and fresh milk and bread. Milk is it's like a hard commodity to come by because it's very hard to raise cattle over there, but still it's like they are taken care of. As regards to everybody else, it's like everyone else is equal. If you see a kid going to school, they all have the same uniform. Like if someone has a little bit more money, their child still goes to the same school and wears the same uniform as someone with less money. But they're like, normally it's very, very equal.
Okay. And so did you notice any keeping up with the Joneses or that kind of
No, everyone wants to look well, and look, they don't have like glamour, I suppose, like we have it, but like that's not what they're about. If you walk into a Cuban house and like normally like they don't have Wi-Fi, so you have nothing else to do but talk. So there's like full of conversation, full of domino playing. There isn't like people aren't too worried about what they look like, because to be fair, it's like, you have your working clothes and then you have your relaxing clothes, and most of the working clothes are uniforms. Obviously, I get where you're coming from. Everyone wants to look right, but it's not a priority.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to establish, that after 60 years of a system that in a way designed itself as an opposite to our capitalist keeping up with the Jones system, I was just wondering, after 60 years, has that become the culture? And it would appear from what you're telling me that it has. Life in Cuba isn't all roses and ideal. In the late 1980s and the early 1990s, we had the collapse of the USSR. And the USSR had an international organization called Comecon. And it was equal to the World Bank for communist countries. And they would offer financial and also aid support, such as food, fuel, etc., to fellow communist countries like Cuba. When Comecon fell in 1991, 1992, Cuba was left in a very precarious position. There was a lot of shortages, from everything from medicines to food to fuel, everything like that. But still, since the early 1990s, the Cuban system seems to have maintained itself. Could I ask Hilary, today, what's it like as somebody who lives in Cuba, who is part of her family in Cuba, and if Nina could come in on this as well, as part of her family in Cuba, what's it like to go and get some groceries? Is there very much want and need in Cuba?
Food-wise, no, but it's a different system. You don't go to a shop. Food, like they're normally open-air markets, but everybody has a patch in their back, and like you grow what you can grow. And there's a lot of bartering. Like, for example, like you might give a cup of sugar to your neighbor and your neighbor will give you some veg. It's like, they're not hungry at all. It's not a food. They don't want for food. What they want for is like our other commodities like soap. Last February, there was a queue a mile long for soap. Stuff like that is still happening. It's ridiculous. Nina, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I'll just unmute myself. Yeah, so just to pick up on that, and about food. So after the collapse of the USSR, Cuba had to become self-reliant and self-dependent. And they learned the hard and fast way. And there's a very good film, maybe Bill can mention that later, that it's called The Greening of Cuba, that you can watch. But they had to become self-reliant. They had no oil, so you need oil to drive tractors, and pesticides. They had no pesticides to the crops. So anyway, they had to learn the hard way. But in a way, they learned skills that we're only catching up with in here, because they learned about food sovereignty and organic growing and sustainability, and even a permaculture, which is, so they learned how to feed the land and the land to feed you. And not only that, they learned about food miles and how most of the food in Havana, that it should come from Havana, from the local areas, and that goes for the other provinces as well. and they learned about mixed culture. So that's just, and look, we could be talking about that for an hour. That's a huge subject, you know. But
it's not a case. It's not a case that the Cuban society are incapable of sustaining themselves with soaps and other goods like that. It is more the case that there's an embargo on Cuba, and has been an embargo for 60 years imposed by the United States government, who compel other countries to refuse to trade with Cuba as well. And can you see the impact of that embargo there?
Yeah, so like one thing I would say is that I'd straight away call this not an embargo, but an absolute war, a blockade, you know, a genocide almost. And that Cuba is incredible for surviving 60 years, and still they still have healthcare, they still have education, they still have culture, they still have all these things which we are only striving for. You know, they're world leaders in baseball, in sport, in culture, which is incredible. So before I get into the blockade, I want to say one thing, that can you imagine what Cuba could do without the blockade? If it can do this, they've recently brought out the 4 vaccines. I could go on. But like, obviously the blockade isn't a war. Like recently during COVID, ventilators were blocked from being sold to Cuba. America straight away bought up the companies that Cuba would buy their ventilators off. Ships, big tankers were stopped docking in Cuba. And if they docked in Cuba, they would not be allowed to dock in America for 6 months. It's not just a blockade within Cuba. This is extraterritorial. What that means, it affects myself as an Irish citizen. It affects Hilary, it affects Bill, it affects everyone here. It means that I can't send money to family. It means that my husband can't send 20 euros to his cousin because the Irish banks are blocked by America to send money. Not only that, companies who want to do business with Cuba are also fined. PNB Paris were, for example, fined billions. If I want to set up a Cuban coffee company, I can't, because I am going to be under scrutiny. I am going to be fined. If you want, I'll let Bill come in here because he's got much more to add. And
Yeah, I don't mind Bill coming in at all. Can I just ask that if anybody else is in any of your rooms watching this program, it could be contributing to the little bit of feedback that we have as well, just to let you know that. Bill, in terms of the embargo and the blockades on Cuba, what do you think?
It's a genocide. It's a complete and absolute genocide. And when you go to Cuba and you see a lot of the buildings in tatters, it's because the Cubans are not allowed import the materials that they need. And if they import some of them, they mightn't have enough to finish the job. So you see all things half finished. And that gives the impression that the economy and the Cuban people are in dire straits, and they're not. The Cubans can suffer that. They don't mind that. They're very proud people, very nationalistic people, even more nationalistic than the Irish. And they'll stand to themselves. Now, about the banks, I'm the National Treasurer, the Joint National Treasurer of Cuba Support Group Ireland. The Bank of Ireland closed their account and sent us all the money we had in the account, and simply closed the account because the American government told them that they would fine the Bank of Ireland if they allowed us to have a bank account here in Ireland. So the embargo is not only interfering with the sovereignty of Cuba, it's interfering with the sovereignty of Ireland as well. And lots of people don't know that. Now, we brought that to the notice of the Department of Foreign Affairs and all, and they didn't do anything about it. And they said they were going to, but they didn't. And at the moment, we have a bank account in a credit union, but we would prefer if we had a bank account in a bank. But we can't go in there and set up a bank account in our own name. And that's
the very real in Ireland effect of the embargo, that even to do something as simple as set up a bank account with the word Cuba in it, in the title of the account, will bring you under great scrutiny. I'd like, because we have a lot to talk about and we've got 12 minutes left, could we turn to Nina for a minute? I just want to talk about the health service in Cuba. If I'm walking down the street, and put it like this, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and I took a little turn I was suffering from an ulcer at the time, and I didn't know what to do because there was 5 different ambulances going past me with 5 different names. I didn't know what to do about health insurance. You had to be with particular companies. The people around me were very concerned about me on the street, strangers, because they understood the confusion of the health system in America itself. If I'm in Havana and I take a little turn, what happens? You're mute. Could you put on? Take off your mute there, please, Nina.
Excuse me. So if you're a tourist, is that it?
Okay, if I'm a tourist, but tell us in both, if you're a resident and if you're a tourist.
Okay. So, well, if you're a tourist, you need your health insurance arriving into the country because, I mean, at one stage before the special period, you could arrive as a tourist and they would take care of you. And we had experience with that. My brother got very ill and he was taken care of really well. But nowadays, if you're a tourist, you need your health insurance and you will be taken care of. And that's no problem. Actually, my father had a problem with his eyes at one time, and he was taken to a hospital in Santo Espiritus, which is a province in the mid-country. And he said, I was smiling because when I opened my eyes, he was going on a cycle trip, by the way, he was in his late 70s and he was going on a cycle trip around the bottom of Cuba. But when I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by foreign students. Every student was from Africa. There was from the Caribbean, from South America. They were all students from the program of the medical school program. Anyway, so but back to medical care as a Cuban, and I think that this is really important, and it's again something that we could only wish for here in Ireland even. So Cuba's medical care and medical system is firstly free from cradle to grave, but not only that, they function in quite a different way because their health system works on a very much a preventative and holistic measure. So the main, the first form of defense, if you like, is the family doctor. And they have the highest ratio of family doctors in the world. So they have time to take care of their patients and they live within the communities and they go and visit their patients. And Cubans always know what's wrong with them. And the family doctor will come into your house and he will not only examine, when you're really ill, but he will detect or she will detect problems before they're even there. So they're already seeing what's going on. And that is also linked in with the social workers. So you'll have these things, they're like on the corner of streets, you'll see old people out and they'll be doing exercises. They'll also take their pulse. Now, Joan mightn't have come out of her house today, but why didn't Joan come out? Maybe Joan is feeling poorly. So we take care of the community at the very basic level. Beyond that, when you get, maybe you need to have you broke your leg or you have a pain, you go to what they call the polyclinic. And the polyclinic are like small clinics within communities. They're often very local, so you won't have to travel very far. So in those clinics come specialists every week. So maybe it's the eye specialist, maybe it's maternity, maybe it's the I'm not a medical person, but all the consultants, as we call them, would come every week. You will then from there be decided whether you need to then go to the hospital to get critical care or whether you'll be treated there and sent home. So it's very much taking care, at the local level. Also, Cuba doesn't just stop this care at their, borders. They go on, and I'll let Bill talk about that, but also they have their own pharmaceutical industry because of the blockade, they were blocked from vaccines. And so Fidel started their own state-run biopharmaceutical company, which makes them, they don't have to compete as private companies do. They work together and share information, which makes them really efficient, actually. So they do all this under the blockade, which is amazing. So at the moment they have 4 COVID vaccines. They have developed a vaccine against lung cancer. And we're also the first country in the world to stop HIV being transmitted from mother to baby. These are named but a few, and it's in Cuba. It goes without saying that you're going to be taken care of.
It's not something.
It's written into the Constitution that you have the right to be taken care of from cradle to grave.
Okay. So in terms of a Bill of Rights of sorts,
I think. Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting, but I know Bill had a couple of things he might like to add on to that.
Yeah, that's okay. And just remember, if you're not speaking, if you could just mute, because just to limit any background noise. Bill, do you want to come in on the health system there?
I do, yeah. The Cubans send out doctors all over the world and into many different countries, and they're there at the moment. They say the Americans drop bombs, but the Cubans drop doctors. They have prevented an epidemic of Ebola breaking out in Central Africa. They have worked on, the Henry Reid Brigade has worked in even advanced capitalist countries in Europe. They went to Milan early on this year to show the authorities there, the medical authorities, how to be able to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And they've done it in Seville and Madrid as well, and in other places in Europe. They're the only people that's going to put the vaccines into third world countries. They have enough vaccines now to be able to, which they made themselves, to be able to inoculate all their entire population. And they're going to give they're making the vaccines now to be able to spread out throughout Latin America. So when this virus is broken and this pandemic is broken, when they break the back of it, it'll be the Cuban contribution that'll make a big effort to do that. And they'll probably get no credit whatsoever, and they won't even look for it. They'll just be pleased that they've done it. Now, the Henry Reid Brigade...
It appears that when you take the profit out of medicine, they're the kind of results that you can get. I recall maybe 6 or 7 years ago getting a bus to Dublin and being and sitting beside a young medical, I think she had qualified, she was a young newly qualified doctor. And I actually brought up the subject of the Cuban health system from the point of view of the few doctors in Ireland and the many in Cuba. And she went into a diatribe putting down Cuban medicine with general statements. But when I asked her to explain why, she couldn't, other than this is what she was taught at college, that Cubans aren't just quite as good as European and American.
Well, it's a strange thing that, because I was married to a doctor for 20 years and I had 4 children with her, and unfortunately she died. But so I do know a little bit about medicine. And she was convinced, and she met Cuban doctors when she was representing Ireland in the UN at the World Health Organization's conferences, and she was very impressed with them. And she said that they, and I was in the Latin American School of Medicine, where there's 7,000 students at any one time, none of whom are Cubans. They're all, the teachers are Cubans, but they're brought over from everywhere, from Africa and from South America, and from the poorer parts of the United States of America. There's a doctor there the other day, I seen her on in the Bronx in New York, and she was a Cuban-trained doctor. And I asked the question when I was in the Latin American School of Medicine, does the World Health Organization recognize your qualifications? Because I know they didn't, the Soviet Unions. And they said, yes, they do. So I said, so therefore anyone that gets the qualification out of this university can go and practice medicine anywhere in the world, the same as anyone from an Irish university can do once they qualify, and it's a recognized one. And they said, yes. I said, how many deflections do you get? What do you mean? I said, how many people opt out? I said, you're living beside 290 million hypochondriacs in the United States, and medicine in the United States is a very lucrative profession to get yourself involved in. I said, are they siphoned them off on you? They said, we've only ever had 1%, and we allow for that. We only ever had 1% deflections. And I said, why do you think that is? And it was actually an Irish doctor that was there when I was talking, having a conversation, Dr. David Hickey. Now, Dr. David Hickey is very fond of Cuba. He's an ex-Dublin footballer, has All Ireland medals. He was
Okay, now I have to let you know, Bill, we are time restricted here. I'm just looking at the clock. We've got 2 minutes.
Okay, well, Dr. David, he was said not have elections is because socialism produces a different type of person. Simple as that.
Okay, I see some comments coming in saying that Cuban doctors were kicked out of Paraguay because they weren't up to par, and that Bolsonaro does not want Cuban doctors. To be honest with you, just to the person commenting, I think Paraguay and Brazil would be two countries at the moment who would very much kick out Cuban doctors for political reasons as opposed to for performance reasons, if I'm not mistaken. We're getting very close to time here, guys. Just in terms of and we had lots more questions. We will come back to talk about Cuba again. Just in terms of the Cuba Support Group Ireland, can you let viewers know how to get involved? And you have a campaign at the moment called Walk for Cuba. Is that right?
Yeah. Hilary, show me a shot there, Hilary.
Oh, go on, Hilary. There we go. Walking for Cuba.
Yeah.
Hilary, do you want to explain what Walking for Cuba is about? Just hit your mute there. Hit your mute. Your mute button, yeah.
So Walking for Cuba, it's a walking initiative. It's two things. It's to raise awareness. About the Cuban blockade, and it starts a conversation. It also it helps us raise funds for Medicuba, which help fund the Cuban medical system. It's based in Sweden, so it's the only way we can get money to them. So people can support us through our webpage or through our Facebook pages. We can also
www. Cuba Support Group Ireland,
or on our Facebook page, Cuban Support Group Ireland, or our various branches. We've got one in Cork, Mayo, Dublin, Derry, and West Ulster. So yeah, it's a great way. We've got high vis, and basically every county or every area has done a significant walk and has written a Cuban flag as a statement in solidarity. And next, actually on Saturday, we're going to pass the baton over to Sweden. So it's going to become an international campaign, which is absolutely brilliant.
And if I can just jump in there, saying that we also have a Facebook site, and if you put @Cuba Support, you will get all of our social media tags: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and it's cubasupport.ie.
That's brilliant. Listen, guys, over time.
Find out more.
Finbar, just one point, Finbar. One of the fellow that you had on last week from Derry, the councillor, Gary Donnelly, he got a resolution passed in Derry City Council, and Derry City, it was passed unanimously. Everyone voted for it, the DUP and everyone else, and they're calling for the Cuban doctors to be brought into Derry for the health situation there.
And the DUP even supported it.
And the DUP man said that he had met Cubans when he was in his travels. He had met the Henry Reid Brigade when he was in his travels, and that they were like to
fall off my seat now. Oh, I can't.
The DUP. Well, there you are. This man seen them, and he said they were like the fire brigade. They didn't care who you were. They just went to rescue you. An SOS is an SOS, and they were there to save souls, and he was said that he had no problem whatsoever in voting for such a humanitarian group.
Okay. So listen, guys, I'm going to have to let us go. Thanks for joining us tonight.
And thank you very much for having us on.
And I hope to speak to you again very soon.
Yes, okay. I'd love to come back.
Brilliant. And if you could just mute your mics, guys, while I just close off the show. Thank you.
Okay.
That's the Cuban Support Group Ireland, and we will be going back to look at issues on Cuba as they develop in the news. We normally have a comedy monologue that I write for the end of the show, but we were supposed to have the comedian Aidan Killian on tonight, but last minute he had to pull out for personal reasons. So instead, I'm going to tell a joke. Yes, I'm going to tell a joke. But before I tell the joke, I just want to talk about something a little bit serious. I've noticed with the shows over the last few weeks in particular, a lot of people putting comments under, or not a lot, but a few, saying that there is no COVID virus and that there's no pandemic. And I can understand the difficulty in trying to draw conclusions when we have information with lots of scientific words and language on both sides of the argument, on sides that are calling for strict regulations and on sides that are claiming that there's no virus at all. When we're presented with evidence that's full of medical talk and biomedical language, to be honest with you, I'll be honest, I haven't got a clue, and I'm supposed to be an educated man. So I don't know how most people around the country are making their decisions at this stage. So I've decided I've had to come up with a method for informing my actions during this pandemic. How do I know what's real or not? So I've decided that the only thing I can trust is the information I can gather in my local community by looking around me. I live in Blackrock Village, just outside Dundalk in Ireland. It's been hit pretty big by the COVID virus, to the extent that my sister, members of my family, many households in my street have been hit very badly by something different, something new. It doesn't seem like a normal flu to my family members and to my neighbour. It's possessed of great exhaustion, of fatigue, of vertigo and dizziness. And eventually, for many of my neighbours, it affected them in a cardiac way, and it affected their respiratory system, that they've had to be taken into hospital, including my sister. There's a number of my neighbours in ICU with this new thing, this new disease. I'm afraid to say virus in case somebody tells me there's no virus, but there's something out there. In the last few days, 2 men, healthy men with no known other medical ailments, have died in ICU because of this coronavirus, with the same symptoms that my sister and my neighbours and my friends have had. So when it comes to me personally now making sense of all of the information that's coming to us with coronavirus, I think the only thing I can trust now is what I see around me. And I'm just saying to anybody who's tempted to put up comments that there's no virus itself, to say, have a look around your community. Do you know the people in your community? I know every family around me. I've been brought up here for over 45 years. And that's how I can get a good view into what's happening in my community. The nursing home 20 metres behind my house has had 14 patients or residents die in the last couple of weeks. That's not normal. And they're dying from something that is not like a normal flu. So maybe what I'm saying tonight is going to help other people to draw conclusions that will inform how they behave over the next few days, weeks, and months. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, my joke. We've no comedy monologue, so here we go. There's an old friend of mine, Jack, and I was talking to him before Christmas. Now, Jack is was the only full-time flasher in Ireland. Yes, he used to love to go down to the parks and flash. He'd get up every morning, he'd iron his trench coat, he'd get the bus down to the park. He lived for flashing. But just before Christmas, he phoned me and he said, Finbar, I'm thinking of retiring from the flashing. I'm thinking of giving it all up. And I was worried about this. I was thinking, now, poor old Jack, sure, he just lives for flashing. That's his life. It'll be the end of him. So I arranged to meet him for a cup of tea there around Christmas. And I sat him down and I said, Jack, listen to me now. Would you not continue with the flashing for another 12 months? Because I'm afraid it will be the end of you if you give it up now. And he sat silent for a few minutes and he looked me square in the eye and he said, you know, Finbar, you're right. I'll stick it out for another 12 months. Join us next week when we'll be speaking to the President of the National Assembly of Catalonia, and we'll be looking at more news from home and abroad that you won't see in RTE. Thank you, guys.